Hi, my name is Myron Floyd. I'm the Dean of the College of Natural Resources at North Carolina State University. First, allow me to thank the leadership of the Center for Nature and Health, the Steering Committee, and Jay Maddock for inviting me to contribute a few thoughts to this important topic of nature, health, and outdoor experiences. My talk will be organized around three questions. Do we value nature for health? Who has access to it? And what can be done to make it more accessible for African Americans and other communities of color? I'll begin with a few quick stats on the value of nature experience. I will share some data on park visitation and highlight a gap between that perceived importance or value of nature and actual visitation to parks, and offer some reasons for that gap. We'll also call attention to current events bearing on who really has access to nature. I'll conclude with three recommendations for agencies and organizations seeking to create connections with diverse audiences. I'll offer these as points for discussion rather than as definitive statements. So we can begin with a basic question. Do we value nature for health? And really, how much do African Americans value nature for health? A large national study conducted by DJ Case and Associates on Americans' relationship with nature found that 68% of Black respondents in that study rated getting outdoors into nature is highly important for their physical health. Furthermore, Black Americans were not much different than all other racial and ethnic groups. A majority across ethnic groups, when asked how important is getting outdoors for your health, indicated that getting outdoors was highly important. That's good news. It suggests broad support for environmental protection and conservation of natural resources. It might also suggest support for increasing access to outdoor recreation opportunities. On the other hand, when we look at data on visitation, we see evidence of disparities in rates of participation in use of federal parks and forests. When we look at visitation to national parks, we can observe clear differences in participation between racial and ethnic groups. In a study of households in the United States, reported in 2009, sponsored by the National Park Service, just 28% of Black American respondents reported visiting a national park site in the 2 years prior to the survey. That was the measure of visitation. The next lowest percentage was for Hispanic or Latinx respondents at 32%. Surveys conducted on-site at U.S. Forest Service recreation areas throughout the country showed even wider gaps or disparities. Over a 4-year period in which the surveys were conducted, about 1% of users were Black and just 3% overall were from a racial or ethnic minority group. A different picture emerges when looking at use of local parks and recreation areas. At the local park level, those disparities observed in data from federal areas are not present. In one of the few national studies on local park use, Annie Mowen and colleagues surveyed U.S. households on perceptions and use of local parks. They reported that white and non-white respondents were similar in their frequency of park use. Among frequent users of local parks, there was only a 5 percentage point difference between white and non-white respondents in their study. Although there are wide disparities in use of national parks and forests, and patterns in local park use appear to be similar, there are other data showing that there are some significant disparities in access to parks. So this leads to my second question. Who has access to parks? I'd like to recall a few prominent examples from recent news events as we reflect on this question. I'm quite sure you've all seen or heard of the situation involving Christian Cooper. Cooper, an African-American birdwatcher, recorded an incident in New York Central Park in which he was accused of threatening a white dog owner because he asked her to put her dog on a leash. The dog owner was recorded saying, quote, "I'm taking a picture and calling the cops. I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life," end quote. Dudley Edmondson, an African-American wildlife photographer in Minnesota, was accused by an elderly white woman of casing homes while he was actually taking pictures of wildflowers in his own neighborhood. She is reported to have said, "You don't look like any photographers I've seen." And that's a quote. Tragically, Ahmaud Arbery was a victim of vigilante justice doing a run for exercise in his own hometown. Many of us grieved over this loss. His death resonated with so many African Americans who must consider the risk of racial hostility and loss of life in the most extreme case when participating in outdoor recreation. Some of you might have seen this. In an article in Outside Magazine, Rahawa Haley wrote about her hike of the entire length of the Appalachian Trail. Near the Virginia-Tennessee border, she recalled being stopped by a day hiker going in the opposite direction. He asked, where was she from? Finding her response that she was from Miami not sufficient, he asked, where are you really from? When she disclosed her Eritrean roots, the hiker was relieved to have his biases confirmed and explained, quote, "You're African, not black. Blacks don't hike," end of quote. Juan Porter, shown in this slide, during a hike in Katahdin in Maine's Baxter State Park, 3 white women began to speak very loudly as he was about to pass them from behind on the trail, as if to alert everyone else that a threat had entered the space. He asked, and I quote, "Is there a reason y'all were screaming at me?" End of quote. They responded, and this is a quote, "You surprised us. We didn't expect to see you," unquote. The outcomes of these kinds of interactions in the outdoors can result in either a diminished recreation experience from answering a few awkward questions, or in the extreme case, injury or loss of life. These incidents and others like them demonstrate the power of white normativity in outdoor recreation settings. To weaponize whiteness, to declare a black man as a threat to life, to define who is or is not an outdoor recreationist, a hiker, a bird watcher, or nature photographer. We didn't expect to see you. Or where are you really from? Or blacks don't hike. Or you don't look like any photographer I've seen. These quotes speak to how race and the meaning of outdoor spaces converge, specifically how white normativity can complicate access to nature for Black people. So how do we make nature more accessible? Stated differently, how do we normalize Black faces and Black bodies in the great outdoors? Throughout history, African Americans have created a culture to survive oppression, marginalization, and exclusion. This has produced a common struggle and collective memory. Carolyn Finney suggests that this idea of collective memory provides a platform on which to shape a new narrative, one that centers Black American experience to construct spaces and experiences in their own image. So what does this look like? Over the past several years, several people of color-led nature organizations and groups have emerged. The emergence of such groups has been important because they challenge and hopefully lead to change in the narrative around African Americans and nature experiences. Groups like Outdoor Afro has more than 90 trained volunteer leaders in cities across the United States who organize outdoor outings for African American individuals and families. Explicit in its mission is a goal to grow representation of Black Americans in outdoor recreation, nature, and conservation. Another example is Girl Trek. Girl Trek promotes walking in neighborhood streets and parks to empower Black women and girls to improve the health of individuals and whole communities. The organization has grown to nearly 100,000 neighborhood walkers nationwide. It has become the largest public health nonprofit for African American women and girls in the United States. A third and final example. In 2013, a team of African American climbers climbed Denali, the highest point in North America. James Mills, the author of The Adventure Gap, chronicles this expedition and profiles others in the world of climbing and outdoor adventure sports. By profiling Black climbers and adventure sport participants, Mills seeks to inspire, his words, greater involvement among people of color and outdoor experiences and environmental stewardship. So how can we make nature more accessible? I'll conclude with 3 recommendations, actually 4. First, agencies and organizations that manage or provide outdoor experiences should recognize the capacity of people of color-led organizations, like those just described, to create opportunities that expand access to the outdoors for Black people and other people of color. Second, agencies and organizations should collaborate with those organizations to develop culturally sensitive marketing and promotional materials. They should also build relationships with the leaders of these organizations and involve them in policymaking and planning. In a series of focus groups with African Americans about visiting national parks we conducted in 2018, one of our participants gave this recommendation, mentioning Outdoor Afro by name, and shared this rationale. In essence, these organizations have a good feel for the concerns in their communities and how to speak to them. And quoting her directly, they've connected it also to health and longevity, that we have to become a healthier people. That's part of their community building strategy as well. End of quote. Agencies that manage parks and public open space must be aware and take action on the concern many African Americans have for their safety and well-being. So a second recommendation, ensure a safe and welcoming culture. As mentioned earlier, on one hand, encounters with others in the outdoors can detract, particularly others in the white community, can detract from what should be an enjoyable outdoor experience. On the other hand, there can be life and death consequences involved. In the same focus group with African Americans conducted in 2018, one of our participants expressed this by saying, quote, "I've gone to the mountains and I've gone to different places. I don't think I would feel safe in those spaces like that to want to go on a regular basis. Definitely not in this period of time," end of quote. A final recommendation is to diversify environmental and conservation agencies and organizations. In the State of Diversity in Environmental Organizations, a report authored by Dorceta Taylor, she documented the percentage of people of color in staff positions, board members, and in executive leadership positions in environmental organizations. People of color represented approximately 13% of staff, board membership, and leadership, respectively. Increasing staff and board diversity and diversity at the top could be one way to shift the culture of an organization toward prioritizing greater engagement with people of color. Moreover, it can help destigmatize diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, leading to diversity and equity becoming embedded in an organization's culture. A caveat is that the desire for diverse representation within organizations must be authentic and go beyond tokenism. An environmental leader is interviewed in Taylor's report spoke to this. People, quote, "People want me because I have brown skin, but they don't want my voice to be different. They want you to then rubber stamp what they're saying. And I say, I thought you wanted me because you really were looking for a different perspective," end of quote. To conclude, making stronger connections between nature and health through health policy, conservation and environmental management, and public health research, we cannot neglect disparities in full access to nature and the outdoors. We must seek to further understand how nature experiences are valued. We must better understand the nature of the gap between values or importance of nature experiences and actual participation in parks and protected areas. And if we truly want to close the gap between values and participation, we must normalize Black faces and Black bodies in outdoor recreation. We must seek to engage African Americans and other people of color communities directly to increase access to nature experiences. In closing, again, I thank the Center for Health and Nature for making this event possible. I also would like to acknowledge my colleagues and co-authors for their contributions to the focus group data I use in this presentation. Again, it's my pleasure to be a part of this important discussion. Thank you.